Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Since we are done implementing presentation layer, now it's time to make our integration tests for the view models, Auth view model, as well as toolbar view model. Under the Android section of testing, I would like here, as usual, to maintain the same structure. I'm going to create here a new package, call it components. The composables are inside the Auth package. Let's test, first of all, the Auth view model. As usual, annotate it with Android JUnit. As dependencies for this test, we need the view model to test, the test dispatchers, as well as the in-memory database. Let's call it mock database. Under setup, we need to have, first of all, let's initialize the test dispatchers, and set dispatchers main or the main dispatchers to test dispatcher. In order to initialize the mock database or in-memory database, we need the context from application provider, and we can initialize the mock database. We need to provide the API service or the mock API service as well as the mock crypto service. Let's provide the repository implementation and the use cases, and finally the view model. For the first test case, we need to make sure that the login should authenticate the user. First of all, let's arrange the email data and the password. In other words, we need to trigger the event on email change and on password change. Next, we need to advance the test schedulers until there is no remaining tasks by calling advance until idle. Then we have to call the event login. Let's rename this parameter to throwable. We need to make sure that there is no error thrown. Assert null throwable. And we have to advance until idle. Afterward, we need to observe the state auth state. Let's await for the first item. And the next item will consist of the user state or the result from the API call and caching the API call into the database. Let's call it state. And we have to await another emission. And let's get the cached user. We need to make sure that we have a cached user. And because it's nullable, we have to use the null safety operator and convert it to user. For the assertion, we need to make sure that the authenticated user inside the state is not null. We need to make sure that the data are pretty much the same, the data from the state and the cached user from the database. And we have to ignore the remaining events. Let's run the test. And the test passed. The trick here for this particular test is to use the function advance until idle. In other words, we're gonna wait until there is no other task. Then we have to call the function login. We need to wait again until the test scheduler is idle. Then we have to make our assertion in order to give some time for the test to observe the different states. With the same manner, let's add the other test case. Login should fail after passing wrong credentials. In this particular test of view model, we're not going to handle the validation, although you can do that, but we're not going to. Just going to focus on the business logic of our application. Let's arrange. This time we're going to provide wrong credentials with the same manner, advance until idle. And we have to act by doing view model on login event, the event, login form event. We have to provide the callback function on error. This time around, we need to make sure that this instance is not null. This is what we want. Let's run the test. And the test passed, indicating whenever we are going to provide the wrong credentials, we will obtain an error. Now for the register function, let's test the register. This particular one should sign up the user. As usual, let's arrange. Instead of providing this email, I'm gonna provide it from the mock data for the password and password confirmation. Next, we have to act, register, and we have to provide in the arguments the callback function on registered and on error. For on error, it's going to be empty, or you can just do fail and the message here got one, for example. We need to make sure that the feedback message is not empty. This is not a feedback message. Actually, we are going to get here the username, and we need to make sure that we got the correct username from the register function. The registered username should be equal to username that we have defined up here. At the end, we have to advance until idle. Let's run the test. and the test passed. Now let's make sure that all the tests don't interfere with each other. There is a problem here. Should authenticate user, it did not fail. So there is something wrong with the succession of the tests. After a little bit of digging, I have found the issue, which leads me to say it's mandatory to make testing. Under the Auth view model, we have passed in the argument of the callback function on registered, we have passed the email. We should pass the name. Let's run again the function or the test. For the entire test, now it has to work. Now let's go ahead and implement the last test for the toolbar. Under this, create a new package. Let's call it toolbar. Under toolbar, create a new class. Let's call it toolbar view model test. With the same thing, we need the view model to test dispatchers and mock database. Configure the function setup. Instead of Auth view model, it should be toolbar view model. We're going to test only one function here, which is the logout function. Let's call it logout should sign out the user. Toolbar event on logout. Under on logout, we need to provide the user ID. On logged out, we're not interested in this particular function. And on error, in this case, we want to make sure that this block is not called. Therefore, I'm going to add here a variable. I'm going to call it on error called. It's going to be a Boolean. Let's set it to false. If we have an error, we're going to change this flag to true. I'm going to advance until idle, and let's go ahead and check the user or the authenticated user or the cached user. Let's call it cached user, user DAO, get latest cached user. Let's take the first emission, and because it's nullable, we have to add the null safety operator and call user. For the assertion, we need to make sure that this data or the cached user is null, and we need to make sure that the on error called is false. In other words, this block is never called. That's pretty much for this test. Let's go ahead and run the test. And the test passed as expected. That's going to wrap up our today's video. We have implemented the necessary composables as well as the view models, toolbar view model and auth view model, and we have implemented the integration test for the repository as well as the view models. For the next video, we're going to implement wish list feature. I hope you have learned something new. See you in the next one, and happy coding!